everyone. Welcome to an astounding, super awesome episode of ARG Presents. I'm your good pal, your good buddy, your good chum, Amigo Aaron, joined by the man that many consider a cheap Taiwanese ripoff of me, the Brent.
No.
No, what? You don't think you're a ripoff of me?
Aaron, please. You are a fine, upstanding citizen with very little brain power. I'm the dead opposite.
Take off. I'm not even going to acknowledge that. So, listen, if you were joined us last week, we spun the wheel, we made the deal, Brent. This is a weird deal this week, I think. We'll be playing a little game we call Versus this week. What's the game, you might ask? Well, bam! It's the Pgm, Polygame Master, versus the neo-geo, the MIGHTY NeoGeo. Brent,
yes.
I'm going to say, before this came up on the wheel, I had never heard of the Pgm, Polygame Master. Had you?
I had played some of their games,
right,
not knowing there was a whole system involved. Especially their Knights of Valor series, I've played many times. So I knew Pgm existed. I just did not know that they were a arcade game loading system.
Right on. I'm the same exact way. So what we're going to do this week, as is the way we do these things, is that we've both picked a side, and we're going to argue and fight for supremacy to see which one of these titans of the arcade was the ultimate in arcade enjoyment. Before we get to that, though, I want to take us back. Take yourself back to around 1990. Okay. In America, in particular, there had been the beginnings of an arcade renaissance, the Brent. And I'd say we could both agree that the arcade renaissance was led by a little game called Street Fighter II from Capcom.
Absolutely.
This game brought people back in droves. I remember going to the beach that year, and there was an arcade there, and there were 4 million people surrounding this game, and I'd only barely heard of it. And man, once I saw it and played it, I could see what the fuss was about. This was an outstanding game, a fighting game that we'd never seen a game like this before, had we?
No, it was incredibly revolutionary at the time, and the emphasis on 2-player. I mean, sure, that many arcade games had 2 players simultaneous before this, but having those quick matches, I mean, you were in 3 minutes later, you were out and at the back of the line. That I think really helped. I mean, the game was incredible, the graphics were incredible, the sound was incredible. It was all incredible, but that revolving door of fresh players at the machine and being able to stay up there longer if you were winning. That also really helped the vibe.
Yeah, I agree. The early 90s were all about fighting games, sports games, and racing games. That's what brought people back to the arcades. Street Fighter 2 absolutely led the way. That beautiful hand-drawn art. You'd never seen characters move like that in a game that looked that good. And the fighting genre before Street Fighter 2, really, you're talking things like Karate Champ, stuff like that, which, don't get me wrong, I love Karate Champ, but I mean, you're talking a whole different kettle of fish when Street Fighter comes to town. And then shortly thereafter, you've got your Mortal Kombat, which is another game that brought a lot of people at the arcades. That's another game, you've got a hit when you walk into the arcade and there are hordes of people around the machine. And it didn't happen that much. In the later 80s, you weren't seeing it that much. I remember you saw it when Dragon's Lair came out in the early 80s, but you didn't see that kind of attention to a game until later on. And then you also had the NBA Jam series that came out in the early 90s, and not even counting on the things Sega were up to in those days with their early 3D racing titles and whatnot. So you had a lot of people coming around. And the arcades started to get hot again. And I can tell you, and I think Brett will agree with me, the late 80s in particular, the arcades really were drying up pretty rapidly, weren't they?
Yeah. Well, they were, even back then, they were beginning to transform into more of what you have today. The ticket games, the claw games. Obviously, not nearly to the extent that they are now, but the writing was on the wall. I remember the first time I walked into an arcade and saw a claw machine, and I was incredibly confused.
Yeah. Yeah, you're not wrong. It is. You bring up a valid point. This was also the era where the arcade started to surrender floor space to the redemption games. And it kept surrendering that floor space until ultimately there was no floor space left for arcade games. If you go into like a most big arcades now, unless they're retro arcades, they're probably 70 to 80% ticket games. Wouldn't you say?
Well, redemption or prize.
Right. Yeah. And so the arcade games were sort of heck. I just went to an arcade not 3 weeks ago. We have a local huge arcade in our local mall, and it's almost all ticket games. And the arcade games receive zero attention. The techs don't even fool with them anymore. So they're sort of there. They may or may not work. It's a real bummer. And also, by the way, the late 80s, you could forget finding a pinball machine in the arcade because those suckers were gone. And that renaissance also took place in the early 90s where you got a lot of the big time, where the pinball machine, like the Addams Family, for example, came back around, and that became something you could go to the arcade and play. So the arcade had heated back up. And it was absolutely time, a perfect time for some new players to come in, including PGM and neo-geo. Now, both these systems, Brent, are effectively machines that hook into a JAMA harness, which was a certified arcade standard for hooking up various boards to a machine. The JAMA standard. If you adhere to the JAMA standard, then your boards would work in any of the many JAMA cabinets that were out there. This wasn't the first attempt to do these cartridge-based interfaces or something, using some sort of standard interface to change different games out. I mean, this sort of thing had been done all the way back to games like Burger Time. There were early games in the arcade that actually had a system where you could take the games out and put new ones in with swaps. So this wasn't anything new, was it, Brent?
No, and it made sense for companies to try to do this because then once you were inside the arcade and your system was in place, if you could just keep selling games that they plugged into your existing board, you held that floor space. And owner-operators would be more likely to buy a new game that they could just pop in and refresh the old cabinet as opposed to changing out all your controls and all of your boards and doing all that stuff. It's a lot easier just throw a new marquee, bezel, and overlay on than it is to try to get a new footprint of a new machine in.
Yeah.
So it was smart for these companies to try to do this.
Absolutely.
There was definitely financial benefits to it.
Yeah, I mean, there were plenty of conversion kits out there that were complete board swaps, but it's so much easier just to swap out a cartridge or a cassette or a disc in some cases than it is taking out the entire board. That much said, a lot of the big players still use full-size arcade boards. Some of the boards in these machines, I don't think people understand the hardware in some of these arcade machines. And I'll use Primal Rage as an example. We owned a Primal Rage board, me and the Brent did, and this thing was the biggest, heaviest board I ever saw. It was every bit of a couple foot by a couple foot, and it was heavy. It was mounted on a big metal plate. These things,
you could beat a man with it.
And with all sorts of crazy stuff coming off the wiring harness, it was not something that would be fun to fiddle with. And keeping in mind that not all arcade machines adhere to the JAMA standard, so a lot of arcade machines sort of did their own thing, which even further complicated the issue. So there was absolutely room for these cartridge-based arcade systems to thrive in the 90s. With that said, Brent, I'm going to let you lead the dance today. Tell us, educate us, if you will, on what is the PGM.
Well, to know what a PGM is, it really helps to know what the neo-geo is, because Polygame Master is an exact copy of what neo-geo was doing in the arcade. Their footprint was basically the same inside the machine. Their ideas were the same, a cartridge load system that you could just in and out real quick, change your games up. And really, even the hardware statistics, for the most part, were the same. if you're, in my opinion, if you're comparing hardware to hardware, you have almost the same thing, except for a few alterations, which I'll get into later. So I don't want to spend a whole lot of time with the hardware. The Polygame Master did have 3 renditions, but I'm mainly going to focus on the first one. It certainly had the most games released on it. The PGM 2 was shrunk down the game list considerably, and then the PGM 3, which was released only in 2012, so not even a decade ago, was a single release game. So, in my opinion, not even worth discussing, although that game was incredible. So I'm going to go straight to the games for the PGM. And when you're talking about games, there's a few things you have to accept if you are playing only PGM games. Okay, you are going to basically get 4 types of games. You're going to get beat 'em ups, you're going to get shooters, you're going to get puzzle, and you're going to get mahjong. Being a US based show, mahjong we can just throw out the window. I know how to play it, but it is not something that I'm going to play it out into a digital form. And it does, you have to understand, the PGM system didn't come to North America. It was a Asian-based system. So the games reflect that. And on top of that, it was mainly a Chinese-based system. Now, it certainly was in arcades in Japan and Taiwan and places like that.
And this came out of Taiwan, didn't it, Brent? The PGM?
Yes. Yeah. So, but it needs to be, the reason why there are so many mahjong games is because that was the market that they were tailoring to. So, with that in mind, I want to just go over some of the top games of each genre you can expect. Now, is the PGM going to beat the neo-geo in sports games? No, there were none, or at least none that I could find. Are they going to beat the neo-geo in amount of games? Absolutely not. The neo-geo library is gargantuan, where the PGM library, you're setting at about 40 games. Now, I don't want you to think, though, that that means these games are just garbage games. They absolutely were not. Real quick, let's go into probably the weakest showing, but still worthy of mention, the puzzle games of the PGM. They had some very unique puzzle games, and one I want to highlight is Puzzle Star. This is a puzzle game like nothing I've ever played before. Instead of having blocks fall down from above, you are presented with blocks that start on the screen, and you push these blocks to the left, and they move to the left, fall down, and then fill up a row. And you have to try to match symbols or characters to get the row to disappear. And if you don't, whatever you put in that row is pushed up onto the playboard, and if you push your playboard past the top, of course you lose. This is an absolutely fantastic puzzle game. It is so unique, and I do not believe the actual Puzzle Star game got ported to other games or to other systems.
Yeah, I've never even heard of that one, Brent.
Yeah, it's incredibly fun. It's incredibly challenging. It's less about beating the clock or something like that. It's more about planning your moves out, because there are some stages where you have to move blocks to the bottom. Well, I mean, most of the stages, you have to move blocks to the bottom and then them come up before you can actually figure out the solution, the puzzle. Very incredible game. And that's something that the Polymaster really did. It really took a lot of chances on their puzzle games. And for me, Puzzle Star, by far the best game out there, puzzle game out there. And that includes the neo-geo. Neo-geo, of course, was not known for their puzzle games. I can't right offhand think of anything that any puzzler that even comes close to Puzzle Star. So the second type of game I want to talk about is an absolute ripoff of the neo-geo, and that is Demon Front. Demon Front is a run and gun game. and it is obviously inspired by Metal Slug. Now, is it better than Metal Slug? Is it different enough to be its own game? Yes, I think it is. Uh, Metal Slug replaces. It's a run and gun game. You pick between 1 and 4 characters, and you run through the stages, shooting and blasting your way. Enemies are more demon or monster themed. Also, you can pick which stage you want to start on, which is incredibly nice. So you aren't getting that tedium over and over and over as you play. You can actually restart your game and play somewhere new, which is always fun, in my opinion, in arcades. And, of course, 4 characters. Now, this was released in 2002, so Metal Slug had already started to do the multi-character things. But here's the big difference. The characters are not just different looking. They actually have different functions. And the reason why that is each of them have their own pets. And the pets can be used as a shield. They can be used as an attack. It's a unique twist on the game. And I enjoy it more than Metal Slug for that. Now, something that is a little controversial maybe is they did take all of the vehicles out of the game. There are no vehicles like there are in Metal Slug. And Metal Slug, that's sort of their thing. I mean, the tank is a Metal Slug. But the inclusion of the pets to allow different gameplay experiences from the very beginning of the game, and it actually feels different. The pets are very unique. The weapons in this are very interesting. They're more elemental based instead of just shooting faster, like in Metal Slug. Don't get me wrong, Metal Slug's an incredible game. I play it all the time. But this really allowed me to experience Metal Slug in a different light. And in my opinion, Demon Front is the best run and gun on the PGM. Metal Slug is the best run and gun on the neo-geo. Which one is better? I think it's a dead tie. I really do. So now we have to get into the meat of what the PGM can bring to the table. They have the absolute best shoot 'em ups in the business. Cave, who is in just the absolute all-star of vertical shooters, came to the system and brought some incredible games. The main one I'm going to focus on, and I'm going to butcher the name of this, is Kitshu. What makes a shoot 'em up good vertical shooter? These are all bullet hells because that's what the Asians enjoy, and I enjoy a good bullet hell too. You have to have unique weapons, stages, and mechanics, and this has all 3 in shining colors. Nothing on the neo-geo can even come close to the precision that Cave is known to develop, and it is on huge display in this game. First of all, you've got beautiful graphics, you've got incredible sound, and you have stage design that is made to challenge the player, keep them moving. This is a game that really gets your blood pumping, and it has the best scoring mechanic of any shooter out there. Where most of these shooters, it's all about chaining kills together, and that's fine, right? You get those huge numbers, it's good fun. This game takes it and it says, the closer you are to an enemy, the bigger point value we're going to give you for it. And once you do that, you can start chaining these things together. And if you shoot an enemy from very far away, you get a chip with a 1 on it. If you shoot an enemy right up close to it, you get a 5 on it. And that scoring mechanic really pushes the player to play out of their comfort zone. Plus, it's a bullet hell. So you have to learn the patterns. This isn't a game you're just going to pick up and play all the way through. First time. You have to learn the patterns. You have to know what pixel on your ship is going to count as a death. And really, for this game, it's several pixels. It's not one little pixel like some of the fight shooters are. The guns in this game are very interesting. If you're a casual player, you can get lock-on guns. So you can just hold the button down, and your guns will lock onto the enemies. And that's, for a casual player, that's great. That allows them to 100% focus on dodging around the bullets that are coming at them. However, for a skilled player, when you do that, it actually lowers your score. The longer you use that, the lower your score gets. So skilled players don't want to use that except, for extreme circumstances. But it still allows for inexperienced players to get in there and have some fun. Incredible design. You're not going to find anything even remotely close to that on the Neo Geo. It's absolutely top of the line. And then, in my opinion, we go to what is the largest boon for the PGM, and that's beat 'em ups. The beat 'em ups on the PGM are incredible. The standout for it is, of course, the Knights of Valor series, and it plays like the Dungeons and Dragons beat 'em up. You have a huge cast of characters in some of the games. In some of the Knights of Valor's games, I'm talking like 30 characters to pick from. It's insane. And each character has their own weapon, that has their own special moves. You have items in the game, so you can cycle through it like the Dungeons and Dragons game. And it does something. In fact, a lot of these PGM games do something that the Neo Geo absolutely cannot do, and that is 4-player simultaneous play. You cannot do that on a Neo Geo. It is not possible. It is a 2-player system. Neo Geo had one game that you could wire it together and play 4 players, and it was a disaster. The PGM system has a plug that goes into the side. Not only can you get 2 extra players from that, 4 buttons, 2 sticks, but you can actually wire that to a completely separate cabinet. So you've got 2 screens, 4 sticks, and sets of buttons, 4 players.
It's actually quite ingenious if you see there's not much to it. It's very simple. It looks like something we would rig.
It's just a breakaway cable.
Yeah, it's just you
don't even need a whole new system.
Yeah, it's just an extra cable that gives you. It's almost like a second JAMA harness that pops out. I did see this piece of hardware. I mean, it's not like they reinvented the wheel. I just go to the assumption that Neo Geo, that SNK just wasn't interested in doing that. And
it's very possible. Yeah. It's very possible. Something you have to understand though is the Knights of Valor game. And there are other games for the system too. Take this expansion and run with it. So much so that the PGM has a card system as well, where you can save your characters on readable memory. And of course, that was a huge thing over the Asian market. Never really made it to North America, and I don't think it had much over in Europe either. But it was something they had over there. Their breakaway cable to add 2 players even added 2 additional card slots, so you could have 4 players with 4 save cards, all saving their characters. And on like Knights of Valor, for example, you can play it and you gain levels, and then you save it to that card. So the next time you come up to the machine, you put your card in, your character might start at level 10 or level 13.
Yeah, that's something that never really came to the States, that whole card saving thing. I mean, it's funny, me and you owned an NFL Blitz machine that it got converted, and it had a card slot. But I mean, you could count on one hand the number of games that had those card slots, and I never saw anybody use them ever in the U.S. It's funny.
Yeah, it never got popular in the U.S. But I think mainly because owner-operators didn't want to deal with it. Because those are the ones over in Asia. A card will cost you like, I think, $2 US.
Yeah.
And then you've got it. You can play it. Some games it even unlocks characters, but most of the time it's just for saved memory.
Yeah.
But having the ability to play these 4-player beat 'em ups in the arcades I've seen some of these massive cabinets that they've got it on, is absolute genius. it really allows you to expand the fun. And if you've got 4 people, unless you want to take turns on some of the games for the Neo Geo, you're just out of luck. Whereas PGM really leaned into that, and a lot of their games featured 4-player action. And apparently, it was very popular over in the Asian market, where you actually saw 4-player cabinets of Knights of Valor and some of these other games. So incredible system. I'm not going to sit here and say that this is the Neo Geo killer, or why have a Neo Geo when you can have this? If you are looking for beat 'em ups, if you are looking for shooters, if you are looking for some that can still do some of that run and gun and puzzle games, this is your choice, because the beat 'em ups and the shooters on the Neo Geo, they simply pale in comparison. And Aaron, I'm going to let you get in here, say whatever you want to say about PGM.
Well, we'll hold off on the tit for tat until after I go over mine, and we'll do it at the end of the show. So
fair enough.
There you go. Well, I'll give you credit, Brent. That was you went into some good detail there. I was wondering if you're going to remember about that wire harness, and so you did. So
Are you kidding me?
You never know.
That's the most incredible part of the PGM.
For something so simple, it is something. So that very good, very interesting take on the PGM. I'll go ahead and get the ball rolling. I think a lot more people are familiar with the Neo Geo from SNK, and I do want to touch on some hardware just for a minute, just to fill people in, because you weren't wrong when you talked about how similar these systems are. So they're
the same thing. They are.
The Polygame Master had a Motorola 68000 running at 20 megahertz. It had a Z80 sound processor. It had a 32 channel sound chip in it, and the Neo Geo had a Motorola 68000 running at 12 megahertz, and a Zilog running at 4 megahertz. So they had basically the same chip, slower than that one. So they were very similar. The sound on the Neo Geo was a Yamaha chip. They did have a different sound chip, but they were very similar. I don't think that was an accident. I think whenever the people over at IGS, you didn't mention this, but I thought I would. IGS, we actually had one of their products for years ago, and I believe it was either one of our slot machines or one of our pachinko machines.
Yeah, we had an IGS slot.
They're more well known for making those slot machines. I think they also made pachinkos. I'm not 100% sure. I know they made slot machines and fruit machines. So dipping their toe in the pool of arcade machines was not a foreign concept to them. This was in their wheelhouse.
They also had some gambling products for the PGM. I just didn't feel like they were worth going into, because that's not what we're here for.
So let's talk about the Neo Geo. Again, this was a game system that was set up through SNK Corporation, and was released way back in Japan in April of '90. This one did come to the States in mass, August 22nd, 1990. So this was right. They came in at the exact right moment to be here for the resurgence. These things were pretty popular in the States. You would see Neo Geo machines all over the place, and they were a great thing to have for someone who didn't want to fool with an arcade machine proper. These were very common to see in pizza places, for example, or stores that weren't arcades, where they could change up the titles month to month without having to go through a lot of rigmarole. So they were very handy, as was the PGM the same exact way, but they just didn't have those in the States. The Neo Geo library dwarfs the Brent's library. Now we know that quantity doesn't necessarily make up for quality. But like Brent said, there's a lot of shortcomings that the Neo Geo covered that his machine just didn't do it. And listen, a lot of these titles are well known, so I'm not going to dwell on them. But I mean, to give you a rough idea, you're talking there were 158 officially licensed Neo Geo games, and which is quite a few. and I'm not taking into account. You've got the two different types of systems when it comes to the Neo Geo. Really, you've got several different types of systems, but much like Brent's, I'm not going to dwell on these like these other ones. I mean, you've got like a Hyper Neo Geo 64, which was sort of like a jacked up version, which did it much like the Pgm 3. It just sort of died on the vine. It didn't release that much for it. The Neo Geo also had a CD system that was released in place of the cartridges, but most of the people in the arcades are going to have the Neo Geo that just had the single cartridge slot, or maybe the one that had the multiple cartridge slots. They're basically the same exact thing, which is one had multiple cartridge slots and one had a single. I meant to ask you this, Brett. Did the PGM, did you see anything where they had any sort of multi-cartridge system, or was it always just the one?
No, they were only a single cartridge system.
Right. I mean, it didn't matter that much. It just gave you a little bit of variety,
a little versatility.
That's right. So
but it also confused consumers. So.
When it comes to games, it's funny. I looked up to see what the #1 best-selling Neo Geo game was, and according to Wiki, and of course there you go. But according to Wiki, the best-selling game for the Neo Geo was Samurai Spirits. That's known in the States as Samurai Showdown. It sold 250,000 units of that cartridge. That's a pretty good chunk of cartridges sold. And of course, that's one of the first games I ever played on the Neo Geo. The Nom game was one I saw quite a bit on those. And there were plenty of others, because one thing the Neo Geo had was, since it was so easy to swap out cartridges, people took advantage of that. And there were a lot of different cartridges. So I did get to play quite a few of these before this ever came to emulation. Of course, everyone knows that the Neo Geo had a home system that no one on Earth could afford, including me and the Brent. In fact, we didn't even have any. I mean, of course, I was on my own by the time the Neo Geo came out. But and I'd heard that you could buy one of these, but no one had one. I knew nobody that had one of these things at home, so that wasn't really.
I mean, it was basically buying an arcade machine.
Yeah, that's right. So, I'm just going to go over some highlight games. I'm not going to go into depth like you did, because your games are less well known than what I will be talking about. But I mean, let me just go over some of the series. I'm not going to go into the individual games. You've got your Art of Fighting series. You've got your Fatal Fury series. You've got your Samurai Showdown series. These are all huge series. Then you've got the big dog, the King of Fighters series that had those iterations. They're still sort of kind of releasing those today, and it's to a certain degree, not on the Neo Geo. You had your World Heroes series, which I was a big fan of. You had the Metal Slugs, and you mentioned the competitor for the Metal Slug. A lot of the games on the PGM were basically sort of clone-y games that they sort of got off of the Neo Geo, which is understandable.
No, I don't agree with that.
Well, I mean, you got to admit that game is
Demon Front is absolutely a Metal Slug clone.
But I'm saying it's a loving tribute to Metal Slug. Let's put it that way.
No, it's a clone. It's their own spin, but it's very clone.
Right.
Yeah.
But I mean,
there's no doubt about
it's funny because I've never been a big fan of that series, but I know it's incredibly popular. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. So, I mean, I'll acknowledge it. It's not my bag, personally. We also had the Neo Geo was, and you mentioned this. It had something that the PGM didn't have, which is fighting, which is sports games, and it had good sports games. I mean,
yes, it did.
I could just drop the mic and just say Neo Turf Masters and just walk away. That's the.
Well, if all you wanted to play was a golf game,
but I'm saying it's the unparalleled master when it comes to golf games and sports games. I mean, when you say, "Hey, what's your favorite sports title?" across the board, that one's going to be in the conversation. I mean, there's no doubt about it. It also had
for golf games, yeah,
absolutely. It also had you also had your soccer games that were pretty good, your Super Sidekicks, that sort of thing. You also had your Windjammers, which I guess you could sort of consider that a sports game. A lot of people really like that game. It also had the great baseball game what's the name of that game, Brent? Help me out here, the one we always play.
2020?
Yeah, great game. They had a lot of baseball stars, too. That's what I'm thinking of. Great game. All kinds of great sports titles that you're not going to get. Now, I will say, and it's funny, I was listening to you say this, and I was like, I'm going to get him. But I can't. Your machine has some great shooters. I mean, there's no doubt about that.
Oh, yeah.
Now, I'm not saying
it does.
The Neo Geo has some good shooters. I mean, don't get me wrong. including like, in fact, we owned one of these shooters back in the day. We the Aero Fighters 2, I believe, is the one we had, but the Aero Fighter series, pretty popular series.
Very Western.
It is. Also, Polestar is good. Viewpoint's a very unique shooting. But I mean, I will say, when you look at those cave shooters, they're good. I mean, if that's your bag, they're beautiful. They're well crafted. You know, Dodonpachi 2 and all those, they're top shelf games. So I will concede, man, that I don't think there's a shooter on the Neo Geo that's in the same stratosphere as those games. I can't deny that. You said there weren't that many puzzle games. I will disagree with you on that. And I'm just gonna listen. Puzzle Bobbles on here, Magical Drops on here. Those are pretty popular games. I don't like them, but people do like them. Of course,
but there's also a Bomberman. All the games from the Neo Geo are puzzle games you can find somewhere else.
You're not wrong, but I'm just saying there are some good games. I mean, at the end of the day, if you've got one of these, it's all about what games you can play, not where else you can play them, right?
I agree.
No, but let's go to the main event. If you've got a Neo Geo, if you're a Neo Geo fan like I am, it all comes down to for me, it comes down to the fighting games, man. You've got the Samurai Showdown series, like I said. Samurai Showdown 2 is one of the all-time great fighting games. It just is. There's no one that can deny it. The King of Fighters series, I'm not saying every one of them is gold, but there are several because there's so many. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And I'm not going to say, well, King of Fighters 93 was great, but King of Fighters, they're all pretty good, and there are some outstanding titles in there. I think King of Fighters 97 is probably right up there at the top of the heap as a great game. Listen, me and you both, you can't deny it, we both love the World Heroes series. We played that a lot. That's a fun series. So when it comes to fighting games, because I went and played some of the fighting games on the PGM, they're just, I'm not saying they're bad, they're just real generic. I mean, that didn't do anything for me. Did you go through and try any of those?
Yeah, the standout, in my opinion, for the PGM and fighting games is a series called The Killing Blade.
Yeah.
And it is something that kind of parallels what they were going for in the later Samurai Showdowns, where it's all weapon fighters, and the weapons that the people have are sometimes, extreme, and just like Neo Geo had the guy with the big column that he would swing around. Those type of extremes.
So,
do I think The Killing Blade is better than Samurai Showdown? No.
No,
I don't. But I do think that if you want a system that has some fighting games, then the PGM has you covered.
Yeah.
Not all of them are good, but some of them are above average.
Right.
And in my opinion, and this is just me speaking on my own preferences, Neo Geo fighters are in the B class, and your games, your Street Fighters, or your help me out here, Aaron, the monster ones.
No,
I want
King of Monsters.
No. Where you've got Morgana and Frankenstein. Darkstalkers. I don't know why I could not think of that. I kept on thinking Demon Souls.
Old.
I know that's not right.
You're getting old.
But I think of those as an upper echelon of fighting games.
You're Capcom, is what you're saying.
I'm a big Capcom fan.
Now, I will say, you've got Street Fighter is an option on the Neo Geo. There are.
Well, King of Fighters is an option for the PGM. So there you go.
Well, I'm just saying that you could actually play the Street Fighter Versus series. There are some that were released on here. So with all that,
and you could play King of Fighters 98 Ultimate Match Hero on the PGM too.
That is wacky that is funny that they did that. Of course, hey, they were making money, right? I mean, ultimately, the Neo Geo gave arcade owners the flexibility of a swappable cartridge-based arcade machine, and with a variety that can't be matched. And I think that was the strength of the Neo Geo. Was it cheap? No. In fact, I would wager, and I tried to find prices on what the PGM stuff was going for. I couldn't find it. I mean, at the time.
I couldn't find it
now,
either.
I know what it's going for now, but at the time, I couldn't find what these games released for. And I know for a fact that the Neo Geo games were very expensive, but they were earners. You saw these Neo Geos all over the place in the States, so that tells you these were earners. That's all there is to it. They made money, and they released a good variety of stuff. And it worked out. And I will say a lot of stuff they released was a lot more stuff that's more U.S. centric, like things that would get over here. If you look at a lot of stuff on your machine, and we'll get to it in a minute, but they released some stuff that I've never seen in the States before, and we'll talk about that here in a little bit. But just a variety of games, you couldn't be beat on the Neo Geo. Again, so the Neo Geo also had the memory card thing, and in fact, in the States, the machines would have that memory card gimmick, but
no one ever used it.
Also, something I want to talk about is the aesthetic and the beauty of a Neo Geo arcade machine. You saw them coming a mile away. They were bright red. They had that art on the side. They had a nice 4-button layout on them. Really easy to understand. They had the instructions written up there so you could understand how to switch between games if that was an option. They did a good job of making the machine approachable and easily identifiable. And I think that is something that helped them out as well. You always knew where they were at, and you always knew what they were when you got there. And generally, most arcade owners would do a good job of swapping cards in and out. Now, not always. You would always come across one of these machines that still had that NAM game in it. That was one of the first games released. And they may, you know what I'm saying? And they may have something, some weird Robo Army or something stuck in there. But for the most part, you got a good variety of stuff. In fact, sometimes you were sad when the game you were playing got swapped out, but that was just part of it. But it kept it fresh. It was a great alternative. I mean, when you look at these, if I'm an arcade owner, I've got to have at least one Neo Geo machine in my arcade. And pretty much every arcade I went to back in this era had at least one of these machines. They were quality. They didn't break down that much. You hardly ever saw a Neo Geo cabinet that was broken down, because they were built well. They're still in demand today. Now there was a time, Brent, where we could have bought Neo Geo cabinets till the cows come home for $100, $100, $200. Those days are over. The hardware inside them alone will go for well over that, and the cabinet itself will go for extra money. You're probably talking $800-900 minimum now to get in on one of these things. But a quality machine with a good variety of titles. And also I want to say that I think this battle, because we didn't pick this battle, this was a user submitted battle. This is a lot like the Game Boy Color versus Neo Geo Pocket battle we had. I mean, clearly there was a winner and a loser in this battle, but I don't think if you look at it from that angle of the battle, that's fair. But I think if we look at these based on what they offered, I think I think it's a little more comparable because they're so similar, and I just think one just didn't have the amount of titles that the other one did. Since we're going down this road, let's go ahead and get back into the tit for tat on these and the comparison, Brent. How do you think these two machines stack up in your mind?
I think if you are looking for an overall system that you can play a plethora of games on, I mean, no doubt you're going to go Neo Geo, right? Because it just offers more variety. And even though I feel the PGM does some things better than the Neo Geo, it definitely offers more. Now, with that said, if you are looking for a system where you are mainly interested in beat 'em ups, or you are mainly interested in shooters, or you are mainly interested in puzzle games, and you want flavors of these other things in there, right? The PGM system is unmatched because their beat 'em ups, there is no system out there that allows you access to the amount and the quality of beat 'em ups that PGM put out. Whereas Neo Geo, undoubtedly, they're the fighting game master. I mean, outside of literally Capcom and Midway, Neo Geo is the third most, fighting system or company out there.
Yeah.
But if you are looking for, and sports games, because PGM had virtually none, So if you were like, man, I can't wait to get into all these sports games, Neo Geo is undoubtedly your choice of the two systems. But shooters, vertical shooters, I'm talking bullet hells, PGM, and I'm not talking about just PGM versus Neo Geo. I'm talking about systems. There are no other systems out there, arcade systems, that have better bullet hell shooters than PGM. I think that, and they have enough other things. They have enough of these one shots, and their fighting games are okay. They're not great, but they're okay. So, and they're all pretty, and some of them have incredible mechanics. I was watching a skills video for Killing Blade, and the combo system in that thing is off the charts. If you're skilled enough, you really can go in there and get some work done.
That one's definitely the pick of the litter in terms of the
fighting.
I
would say so. Yeah. I would say so.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, I mean, you have a focus on beat 'em ups and shooters, and then it sprinkles in some quality puzzle games and some adequate fighting games. That is what PGM is. And if that's what you're looking for, then this is your choice. You're not going to go Neo Geo. You're going to go PGM.
It's funny. I will say this, because when we first started this thing, I was like, I'm going to drop the hammer. I mean, it's obvious that the Neo Geo is got a lot more going on. But that much said,
an overall better system.
The PGM does. They actually excel in areas, and keep in mind, you're talking 2 or 3 titles, but I mean, they excel in areas where the Neo Geo isn't well done. It doesn't have a lot of, and
it's more than 2 or 3 titles.
Well, no, but what I'm saying is,
Cave has like 4 or 5 shooters on the PGM, and then there are other shooters too.
Right, but
so you're not limited to 1 or 2 games. You've got 5 or 6 games of each.
But the tippity top ones, you're talking 2 or 3 great ones. Is what I'm saying. And versus Neo Geo, the Neo Geo,
I don't agree with
the Neo Geo. I would not say. I think their shoot 'em up library's okay. All right, it's got some good.
It's very Western.
It's got some good titles in there. But one thing the Neo Geo doesn't do that well, in my opinion, is beat 'em ups. I mean, if you look at the list of beat 'em ups, you're talking stuff like Burning Fight, Robo Army, and the Sengoku stuff. The Sengokus are okay, but the other ones aren't the best. Okay. And I will say, me and my son have played through most of the fighting games on the PGM, the big ones,
the Knights of
Valor, the Oriental one, and they're not. Listen, are they the best thing I ever played? No, but they're better than probably the best stuff I've played beat 'em up wise on the Neo Geo. And there are tons of them. Now, a lot of them are variants of themselves, or just add extra players or whatnot. But that's still Knights of Valor. That's a big series, and it's fun. And so I mean, you've got to give the nod on that. I mean, it's probably better than anything that's on the Neo Geo beat 'em up wise. Much like the shooters, if you took the best shooters off both systems, the PGM's going to have the best shooters. So if you look at it that way, that's a big win for a system that only had, I mean, realistically, you said 40, but I mean, when you narrow it down, you're talking about around 27 games that are going to be.
Oh, no, it's about.
You take all the bootlegs out, and the mahjongs,
it's about 35.
Yeah, and the variants.
Games.
So there's not like a crap load of games there. But I mean, hey, if you're going to do something, be the best, right? I mean, it can't compete with the Neo Geo and everything. And I wonder if that was by design, that where they said, okay, here's where we could get ahead. I mean, you're right, from a hardware perspective, it actually is superior in terms of what's on the board. But it's a superior machine.
Negligible.
It came out a little bit later, and they put better stuff on it. But I mean, it's not like a huge difference. Could the Neo Geo have pulled off these cave games? Probably. I'd say they probably could have.
Yeah, I agree.
But it doesn't mean but they didn't. And PGM did. They had cave in there. Cave's a big get. So you got to give them that. It's funny. Neither one of these machines are really do a whole lot in the realm of racing. I mean, Neo Drift Out probably is the only title. Did the PGM have any racing games that you saw?
If it did, I did not play them.
It's funny how these here we've got all these titles, especially on Neo Geo, and That's a glaring deficiency. I don't know if that was a big deal back then, or they didn't have the hardware to pull it off. So who knows? Of course, clearly the Neo Geo has the edge on pretty much everything else. I didn't play that puzzle title, so I'm going to defer to you on that. I mean, the Neo Geo has plenty of very popular, well-known puzzle games. So it's not like, even stuff like even some classic arcade games. I'm like Neo Mr. Do is an interesting game too if you're into that sort of thing. I always like that. It's not a puzzle game, but it's an interesting look and on the Mr. Do franchise. You've also got your horse race and stuff that you don't get that much of anywhere. So they've got some oddball stuff on here as well.
And sure, and PGM does as well. They have their gambling games, and they've got a lot of bar top games.
Yeah.
Like find the differences in the photos, or puzzle boxes where you move the tiles around. So I think both systems have their quirkiness, plenty of quirkiness out there.
Yeah. Now let me ask you: as we're winding this down, how do you think these machines stack up to something like the CPS-2 that came out a little later from Capcom in terms of its library? I mean, you're talking cream of the crop fighting games on that as well. Plus, that was sort of the next generation of these machines, if you think about it. Wouldn't you agree?
Well, I have an obvious bias towards the Capcom games.
Yeah.
But the CPS-2, I mean, it did have other games besides fighting games in that system.
Yeah.
Do I think there was enough other things to put it above Neo Geo? Probably not. Because of the Neo Geo's library, I mean, there's like what, 160 games?
157, I believe is what it was.
So, and like 90 of those, 80 of those are very playable games. And then the rest are either garbage or upgrades of something that if you're going to play something, just play the latest version.
Right.
So that's a lot more variety than CPS-2 gives you. But the quality of CPS stuff, man, it's all so top notch.
Yeah.
I would be hard pressed. I would probably go CPS-2, but I would struggle with the choice.
Did you happen to look up what these boards are going for now on the PGMs? Can you even get these? Can you get one of these in the States?
I found them on other sites instead of eBay.
Yeah.
And of course, all that kind of stuff is
like I'm
is
looking.
flaky,
I'm looking
right
now. You can get a PGM just
for about $70.
Yeah, and it's funny. The Neo Geo is not a whole lot more. You're looking at about $125. What they get you, because really there's not much to these. So, if you look at it,
they're just a place to plug.
Where they get you on these, if you wanted to buy one of these now, is the game cartridges. Now, Neo Geo has such a vast library. You can get some of the game cartridge for a pretty decent price. I mean, depending on what you're looking for. I mean, if you're looking for something like an Art of Fighting or one of these lesser-known titles, you're probably going to pay $50, $60. If you're looking for some of the classic titles, the big dogs, the stuff that's rare, you're going to be paying literally thousands of dollars. And I've heard that the PGM titles, a lot of the more sought-after ones, are very, very expensive. So,
for example, the King of Fighters game for the PGM, which is actually for the PGM2, is going for about $500.
Yeah.
But your normal cartridges, even some of your more well-known games, your Knights of Valor types things, are going from the $60 to $80 range.
Yeah, which, I mean, if you think about it, you could get in on that. I can see why people collect for it. It would be, for both these systems, it'd be fun to have one and collect for them. They're the right size where you could consoleize them pretty easily. It'd be a real easy trick to just make a super gun or something and use them.
Slap a super gun on it and you're done.
But ultimately, if you're going to try, this is not the kind of machine, either one of these, even with the limited titles in the PGM, it's not the kind of machine where you're going to try to go out and get them all, like Pokemon style, unless you've got the big money. So I'd like to ask the people, if people watching this or listening, tell us what your thoughts. I'd like to hear if you've got any personal thoughts on using a PGM. We've got a lot of listeners from overseas. If you've ever seen one of these in the arcade and tried it out, I don't know. Did you find out, Brent, if these things, the PGMs, had their own sort of personalized arcade machine like the Neo Geo. I never saw anyone that had an arcade machine. I just always saw the bare board.
Yeah, I think these were a lot like the Neo Geo cabinets, where they came in like a standard cab that you could just slap it in.
Do you know what did it look like? Did it have its own flavor? You know, like the SNK machine did.
I don't believe so.
I looked. I never saw one. I looked all over the place and even try to find one. And the only thing I ever find is the little red board, not the actual machine.
Right. Well, hey, you know the oh shoot, they have a name. The Asian white arcade machine.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about.
That's kind of the standard for over there. That's the only thing I ever saw it put into.
I see. Okay, well, fair enough then. Well, with all that said, please, we'd appreciate your thoughts and comments. Let us know. And by the way, let us know, who do you think won? I mean, I will say, this is a lot like the Atari ST versus Amiga show we did, Brent, where you think there's going to be a...
I dominated that much?
No, listen, we try to be realistic on this show, okay? I mean, the Neo Geo is the man, all right? It's the man. But for a little console that I never heard of, for a little, arcade board, I should say, this thing brought unique things to the table. I can't deny it. I'm not a liar. I got to call it like it is, man. And, when you've got Cave working on your machine, those guys know what they're doing. And when you've got a decent little library for what you've got, I think it's a unique element, a unique aspect to the machine. And by the way, having only 40 titles for your arcade swapper, listen, there were plenty that had far, far fewer that tried the same gimmick. So, and the fact that they released 3 of these tells me that this thing was successful enough that they made a few buckaroos on it, Brent.
It was actually successful over in Asian arcades.
There you go. I think it's a unique footnote in the arcade scene, my friend. And with that in mind, let's head right over to the wheel. Here we go. Now, Brent, this week we played so much Neo Geo, we played so much PGM that I got in the mood for some fighting. So I put fight on here. We'll pick a fighting game if we get that one. The Retro Rewind piece this week, your favorite, Brent. It's the Commodore CDTV. It's back. It's back for more.
Oh, no.
We got a loaded wheel here, Brent. Do you have anything on here that looks enticing to you?
Man, some of those old pieces scare me.
Listen,
so we'll have to see what we get.
After this week, I'm scared of nothing, because I'd never heard of the PC. I'd never heard of this thing until this week. It was fun to learn about it and play some of the games, too. And I didn't realize I'd already played a bunch. So here we go. Round and round she goes. The big winner is... What do we get here? Fishing games. Fishing games, Brent. Now that is interesting. This was a piece suggestion from Matthew Perrone and Olaf Hope. It was a double, Brent. That doesn't happen that often. Do you have a thought on some fishing games? I mean, there are some out there.
Oh, yeah. I know my personal favorite is unemulatable. So I'm going to have to dig deep to see what I can find. Huh?
What is your personal favorite?
I believe it's the Big Bass series from Sega, the arcade games. Yeah. But with the actual reel that you pull and to set the hook and reel it in, the arcade one.
Oh, I see. Yeah, there's some really fancy arcade fishing games. Now this, yeah. I'm not gonna lie. I don't think I've hardly ever played any fishing games. Now we're going.
I already know what I'm picking.
Now let me ask you. You can fish in a lot of games, okay? No, we're not doing that, right? Just it has to be something that's solely for fishing.
It has to be fish themed.
Okay.
Not something where you can fish.
Fair enough. So there's the ground rules. Any system, arcade, home, we can do it all, right? As long as it's something you can play today. That's a fishing base, right? That's the rules.
What do you mean play today?
I mean, if I can play, if it's in the arcade, it's still in play, right? If we want to do an arcade game.
Oh, yeah,
okay,
I guess.
Very good. Fair enough. So, and we want to thank Matthew Perrone and Olaf Hope for suggesting fishing games. That should be a lot of fun. So please check us out next week. I hope you enjoyed the show. We had a good time with this one just because it was so foreign to us. No pun intended. It's just that going out I love finding new systems and trying them out. And this was one that has really been one that I didn't know anything about. So that made it a lot more fun. Any parting thoughts to Brent?
I guess next week it's going to be a nice day for fishing.
Oh, good one. That was your parting thought? Holy cow, you were fishing for compliments after that one. We'll talk to you guys next week. Until then, have a good one.
Thanks for joining us today. We really hope you enjoyed the show. Hello to our YouTube subscribers and our Twitch followers. A special thank you to Duncan Styles for our vector graphics and Bartbit for an amazing closing theme. Want to help keep ARG spinning for as little as $1 a month? You can do so at our new Patreon at patreon.com/ARGpresents. Just like these fine folks: Graham W. Vetke, Rollo, Olaf Hope, Anthony Jarvis, Terry Howard, Gary Heather, John Schaller, The Slow Norris, Frodo NL, Steve Rasmussen, Bernhard Lucas, Chris Folds, Mitsuyama, Jason Warnes, Rob Black O'Hara, Andy Craig, Dave Velociraptor, Retroalgy, Hermsky, Roushi, John Dykeman, Jerry Dennington, Z9K9, and Mr. Bean. Don't want to explain another credit card bill? That's okay too. You can help us out by leaving us a positive review on Spotify or Apple iTunes. Have an idea for a wheel piece? Email it to us at argpresents@mail.com. We film live every Sunday, 10 a.m. EDT on Twitch. Hope to see you there.